Major phone carriers make you sign contracts with rigid data plans to trap you into a kind of forced phonogamy. Sounds pretty insecure if you ask me. At Consumer Cellular, we believe in a more consensual and healthy form of phonogamy, free of contracts and more flexible to your data needs. This way, you stick around not because we force you to with contracts and fees, but because you love our phone plans. Like ardently love our phone plans. Phonogamously. Consumer Cellular. When freedom calls, we're here to answer. Call us at 1-888-FREEDOM.
Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. Kieran, you're good with all numbers and that sort of thing, so perhaps you could explain to me how on this podcast I will talk for 25% of it, you will talk for 75% of it, but we'll still come out on as even. As bizarrely happened at Selhurst Park. I feel I should apologise, Kieran, if it wasn't for the fact that you battered us so much. It's even more funny that we got a point. As somebody in the pub afterwards said, that's the best team Brighton have ever had, and they still couldn't beat us mongrels.
Yeah, it was like playing a Sunday League team, and then Robert Sanchez decided to have a hold my beer moment and try to out Sunday League Palace. It was just bizarre. And sometimes it's football. It's football. Just accept it.
Well,
could have been worse. We could have had a perfectly legitimate goal disallowed by VAR because they lined up the lines with the wrong defender.
It took them 3.5 minutes to work that out. That's sorry. I just love the look on the referee's face when your keeper dropped it like that, because he was obviously thinking something must have happened. That there'll be a voice in my ear. He can't just have dropped it. Somebody must have fouled him. But yeah. Well, also, Kieran, I mean, you were there. You were in the pub with us at 2:00 when you heard the sound of. If anybody ever asked you what the sound of 200 people in a pub going, "Oh Jesus, Tompkins is playing," sounds like you can now describe it, because that's exactly what happened. Which is obviously the moment when I should have gone and put a bet on Tompkins scoring a goal in the game. It was lovely to see you, Kieran. Nice to see you enjoying being fanboyed over by various Palace supporters in the pub.
Yeah, a great time. The Portons Arms is certainly my favourite pub. As a person that never goes to pubs, I felt I was made very welcome, and all the Palace lads there. That's what the rivalry should be all about: taking the mickey out of each other before and after, but still having respect in the sense that I've got more in common with Palace fans than I do with Chelsea or Manchester United or Liverpool, because ours is a choice of postcode. You know, that's where we were born, that's where we grew up, and that's all that matters.
Yeah, it was worth seeing you yesterday just for the slightly baffled look on your face when my friend Roy said you didn't sound that tall on radio.
Yes.
He can't hold his drink. Hi, Roy. Questions day, Kieran. We've got some cracking questions. The first one is a long one, so we need to start wading into it as it gets deeper as we get in there. It comes from Mika Tapio. Mika, I apologise if I've not pronounced that correctly, but Mika Tapio, I hope it is. Mika says, I'm a graduate of the First Price of Football online course, so I've already learned quite a bit about football finance directly from Kieran. But there's one area that still intrigues me enormously, and that's the question of stadium ownership and how to sweat such a significant asset. Notably, I've been wondering whether it's always good for clubs to own their stadium, or sometimes a long-term lease like West Ham is actually a better option, and whether that is simply a question of financial cost-benefit analysis. Even companies have to make a decision about whether to own versus lease their office, but football, we know, is a very different business altogether. So my question is, what goes into the decision-making about stadium ownership, and in which situations would it be better for football clubs to lease their stadium? I suppose, Kieran, the answer to that is history a lot of the time, because most of those decisions were made a long time ago. It's a relatively new thing for clubs to have to decide whether or not they're going to lease or buy a new stadium.
Yes, I mean, certainly since the Taylor report, we have seen the creation of new stadiums when clubs have considered whether to develop the one that they historically used to play in or move elsewhere. Sometimes it is a pure financial decision. So if we take a look at let's take a look at two clubs in London. We've got West Ham and Spurs. West Ham are paying £3.6 million rent a year. And that includes effectively close to zero of the running costs. Even things like the flags, I believe, are paid for by the local council. So sometimes it will come down to price. If we compare that to Spurs, Spurs have got a depreciation charge, which depreciation is when you do buy an asset. It's a bit like amortization. If you buy an asset for 100 and it's got a 20-year life, you depreciate it. It works out as 5 a year. But so compared to West Ham's £3.6 million in rent, Spurs have got a depreciation charge of 72 million, and they've had to go and borrow money from the bank. So they're paying another probably 25 to 30 million in terms of interest costs. So in that particular circumstance, you can see the benefit of West Ham. Also has to be said that West Ham negotiated the deal really well, or the landlord negotiated the deal very badly on behalf of the London taxpayer. So price is certainly an issue. I think the other main issue that I'd probably consider, Mika, is what rights do you have as a tenant? If we look at the main or some of the key income streams that could impact upon an own versus rent issue, what about naming rights? Yeah, we know that Spurs have been in talk about naming rights for White Hart Lane, as its real name happens to be. But they've not gone through yet. But if they do go through, that money will come to West Ham. Sorry, that money will come to Spurs. In the case of West Ham, they might have to share that with the landlord. What about catering rights? Spurs make £800,000 a match from catering. They get everything, all the profits from the merchandising, unless Nike take their cut, of course. And Spurs can also use their stadium on non-match days. We know that the NFL play there, there's concerts taking place and so on, and all of that revenue comes in to Spurs. And we'll be taking a look probably at Spurs accounts on Thursday, because they've just come out over the course of the weekend, to see the benefits of that. West Ham don't get their benefits. They have to concede quite a lot. If the London Stadium is being used for concerts, then that money goes to the landlord. So it is a balancing act. You have to weigh up the positives and the negatives. If we look at Manchester City, who broadly were in a similar position to that of West Ham in moving to what was the Commonwealth Games Stadium. I remember, I think it was 2002 Commonwealth Games in Manchester. I remember going to it myself. That City have the benefit of being able to expand the stadium. If any further development, provided they're prepared to pay for it, the landlord tends to say, I'll let you go straight through with it. Whereas for anybody that's ever rented an apartment, even simple things like changing the colour of the front door or putting on a satellite dish can result in the landlord coming down and being a bit of a provocative individual. So it's the same as rent versus buy in respect of all property decisions, and each has their own benefits. But in the case of West Ham, deal of the century, or bad deal of the century if you're the taxpayer.
Yeah, can you remind me, Kieran, or tell me, so I'm not sure if I ever knew in the first place, were West Ham planning to move anyway, or did they decide to expedite the move because the London Stadium became a potential place to go to?
No, they weren't planning on moving. I mean, it could be argued that Upton Park had a capacity of around about 36,000 from what I recall. As an away fan, I used to love it.
Yeah,
it was when West Ham were on fire, it was an absolutely rocking place, and you can't say that about the new place because it is so big, and it is clearly an athletic stadium, sort of quasi converted into a football stadium rather than the other way around. So West Ham would have probably stayed at Upton Park. Clearly, there had to be some sort of legacy issue with regards to the Olympic Stadium. I believe Orient were interested at one stage, but I think we have to be realistic. I know we've had Barry Hearn on the show.
Yeah,
that Orient we're going to rattle around the stadium, even if they kept the sort of the capacity down to say 30 or 40,000. Orient have a natural ceiling, and again, as an away fan, I love going to Orient. It's just one of those really, really good places with loads of decent pubs nearby and so on, which you can't say about with regards to the London Stadium. So West Ham pitched as tenants and were awarded the deal, and that then gave the David Gold and Dave Sullivan the opportunity to sell the stadium. And whilst it's before our time, some of the profits on that deal were very interesting. Very interesting. I'll say no more than that.
Yeah, oddly enough, we have a question about Orient coming up, and if I was a braver person, Kieran, I would segue straight to it now, but I'm too scared to produce a guy. Because, as you know, he tells us he doesn't just pick these randomly out of a hat and bung them down in a kind of William Burroughs cut-up technique style. Look it up, kids. Yes, Orient, I think Barry Hearn reminded us, the Orient plan for the London Stadium is when it looked like Tottenham might be moving in there, because his plan was that Orient had the hockey stadium. So it would almost be within, so Orient's stadium would be like 12,000, almost within the footprint of Tottenham's one. So it's probably never going to work. Our next question, Kieran, comes from Elliot Cram. And Elliot says that you, Kieran, often praise clubs who are open about their financial records. Are there any reason for clubs not to disclose this record, other than to be careful and crafty, shall we say, about their finances? And if they are being careful and crafty, what are the reasons that aren't careful and crafty? Otherwise, are there any legitimate reasons for not disclosing financial records?
Well, there's a legitimate reason in the sense that there is no statutory obligation to do so.
Okay.
If you are what is described as a small company per company's legislation, and for a small company, it means that your total income is less than £10.5 million and your balance sheet total is less than 5.1 million, then you are allowed to publish, cut down the so-called abbreviated accounts. So there's no profit and loss account. So that means you don't get the split between TV money and match day ticket sales and commercial income. You don't have to go and show your wage totals. You don't have to go and show the interest costs, which could be interesting. Yes, we know that sometimes owners of clubs lend money to clubs. Now, we tend to think that those loans are interest-free, and many of them are, but equally, many of them aren't. So just how much interest are the owners charging to the clubs? It's that information is more difficult to see, sometimes impossible, in the case of clubs that are using these. So I think it's perfectly legal. In any other industry, you would say it would be standard practice, because people have some of the benefits of being a limited liability company in the sense of a bit of protection from creditors. There's not really significant tax advantages anymore. I think there used to be perhaps 20 years ago. But it just gives you that little bit of privacy, and people like it. How often do you actually ask people how much money they earn? It's just not a British thing to do, is it? We're not that way inclined. So as far as the advantages of going down this route, Elliot, it's that it means that you get a bit of secrecy between your club, or if you're the owner of a club, and the competitors. They don't know what your wage budget is. They don't know how much money you're generating from that fancy new sponsorship deal, and that creates a bit of uncertainty. And if you're a poker player or anything like that, you say uncertainty in the opposition gives you an advantage if you're in a position to leverage on it. I think the EFL, and I may be wrong, and I'll probably get a call from EFL Towers if I am. I think the EFL's effectively set out the budgets of each of the clubs in each of the divisions, but they don't name the clubs. So you can sort of have a sort of a glorified game of pin the tail on the donkey, trying to work it out. But for 24 clubs, you're never going to get it anywhere near right. So it gives you perhaps a stronger position in the transfer market if you don't disclose the information, because agents won't know how much you're paying in your total wage budget, and therefore they can't perhaps necessarily ask for more. So it is the advantages are to the owners. There is a case for saying, we saw the clubs in the EFL be able to take interest-free loans as a result of COVID. There's a case for saying that should there be an independent regulator, which will ideally give clubs some protection, that part of the cost for that, part of the payback in respect of that, was that they should publish full data, because the best people to hold the club to account, in my view, is the fan base. And if you give people full information, then they have a greater understanding, and therefore they can A, hold the owners to account, and B, they can also say, actually, we're giving the owners a load of grief, but having seen these figures, we can perhaps understand why certain decisions have been made, because the clubs had to sell player X, or it can't afford to invest in the transfer market because it's losing a lot of money. So there are advantages of being more transparent, but owners tend to be a bit distrustworthy of giving information to fans. They think we're a bunch of troublemakers. They also think we're idiots a lot of the time as well, which doesn't help.
A couple of things off the back of that, Kieran. And first of all, can I suggest that you're probably in enough trouble with the Baroness as it is just at the moment, without you suggesting that she puts a blindfold on you and puts up 24 24 Football League teams while you try and pin a tail on one of them to work out which is earning which amount of money. Second, that seems to me, so £10.5 million below that, you're counted as a small business. That seems to be a fairly high, to me, that's a sizable chunk of money for anyone to be earning and still be counted as small. And thirdly, I'm very much by that criteria a small business, but Bobby Numbers gets quite twitchy when I suggest that I'm less than open about financial records. I don't quite understand why the accountants of the football clubs, presumably they can't be less than honest when it comes to telling HMRC how much they've earned and spent over a season, can they? That's not that's a different sort of open honesty.
That's right. I think we need to separate two things here, or two relationships. Firstly, the relationship between an individual or a business, or in our specialist case, a football club, and HMRC, where you've got to conduct yourself appropriately. Yeah. But secondly, the relationship between the football club limited and the fan base. Some owners will say, you're just being nosy. You're not entitled to see it. But those, I agree with you. Those numbers are quite big. I think about 99% of companies that exist these days don't need audits and will be classified as small. Right. But the government's made that decision. There is still greater disclosure in this country than there is in the vast majority of others. Companies House, which I'm sort of slightly addicted to, is a magnificent resource. But it does come with caveats, in the sense that every set of accounts that is lodged there it tends to be unaudited. 99% of them won't be. So you've got to have a degree of faith in the people presenting the accounts that what they have done is legitimate and honest and transparent. That can often be the case. If anybody's ever submitted sets of accounts to Companies House, you can do a sort of a dual submission with Companies House and HMRC. So therefore, you've got to be honest with HMRC, and the accounts go through on the nod to Companies House as well. But it does mean that the vast majority of companies show very, very restricted information, and perhaps that's right. It's the likes of Sainsbury's and Marks and Spencers and big industrial companies. I think have a public responsibility. Your local butcher who's incorporated because it could be that inherited the company from other members of the family, for example. They're entitled to an element of privacy.
It turns out, Kieran, the question that mentions Leyton Orient is actually the next one. So I could have jumped straight to it, and we would have looked very clever, and we could have gone back to the one before it. But I didn't because I wasn't paying attention, which is pretty much the case in 25% of the pods, rather than
if only Robert
75%.
Sanchez had been paying attention yesterday.
This is a good question from Shane Tanner. Excuse me. It's one of those you think, why have we not thought about this before? Shane Tanner says, do footballers get paid an equivalent of London waiting reflected in salary? Granted, it's obviously less of an issue in the Premiership, but further down the pyramid, the cost of living for a player at Leyton Orient, and the average house price in Leyton is 525,000, will be more significant than, say, Rochdale, where the average house price is 190,000.
Yep, I think this is an absolute cracker, Shane. I've been in contact with a couple of executives from clubs and say, anything you could say about this? And the response was, officially, there is no such thing as a London waiting. If you look at my profession, the teaching profession, you do get a London waiting for being a teacher in London. I think you do get a London waiting for being a copper in London as well, which doesn't excuse the behaviour of the Metropolitan Police yesterday in kettling us back to the station and seeming to take a quite joy in being obnoxious at times. But that's a separate issue. But there is an unofficial waiting in the sense that if you want to attract a player from Accrington or Morecambe or Rochdale, then you would probably offer them a bit more as a London club. I don't think that many players, unless they're born in the area, who come to London clubs, the lower league clubs, tend to live there. They tend to sort of live in the M25 area just to reduce that very intense cost of being a resident in London, and also. If you are in a lower league club, the chances are you're on if you're on League One or League Two, you're not going to get more than a 2-year contract the vast majority of the time. So you've then got the pain of moving to London, having to pay stamp duty, which is extortionate on the deal, and then 2 years later you could be off to Lincoln or you could be off to Newport, and it's cost you a lot of money. So players quite often will rent if they are moving to a club. I know one player who retired probably 10 years ago, and I think his second club was Sunderland, and he bought his first apartment in Sunderland, and he still got it, even though he's been to 7 or 8 clubs since then, and he's just rented other places. So sometimes players realise that because it is quite a nomadic profession, that it's probably best to have one HQ, as it were, and to only physically move if you get if you get a promise of a long contract and an incentive to move and to have an accommodation there.
Yeah, don't start making me get all tribal defending the Metropolitan Police, Kieran, when the East Sussex Police are capable of doing their own perfectly good job at keeping fans outside a football ground for much longer than they should be. As a friend of mine says, every year, after yet another hour away, you'd think they'd be a bit more rural down here and a bit more relaxed, but it turns out no. Our next question comes from Carl Hamburger. Now, I like Carl Hamburger because you remember last week, Kieran, we had a question from Lars Grimm, and Lars got quite defensive and said, yes, I do have a brother. Whereas Carl Hamburger, no such thing, he just straight me, the name's Carl Hamburger. And as we know, because he's proud of his name, I've dropped all the puns that I inevitably did start thinking of. But Carl Hamburger also has a good question. It says, as we know, loads of footballers earn very high salaries. However, they also have a shortish career time frame compared to other professions. Do the UK tax authorities take this into account when levying tax? So can footballers spread their earnings over a time period longer than their playing career? And are there special arrangements for pension contribution? And now, to me, Kieran, that sounds like a perfectly legitimate thing to do, but I'm guessing that it sounds so legitimate it's not.
Well, the rules have changed. If we deal with Carl's second question first, it used to be that as a professional footballer, you could take your pension at the age of 35.
Oh, wow.
But and this was until 2006. So if you'd enrolled in the PFA, having said that, if you had taken it at the age of 35, even if you were on decent money in 2006, I think you'd be finding life quite tough. The rules have now been changed, and post 2006, you can now draw your pension at the age of 55. So with the exception of James Milner, I suspect most players are going to have a sizable gap between when they hang up their boots and when they start to draw down their pension. So that's the pension issue. In respect of Carl's first question, under the PAYE scheme, you are taxed on your remuneration in the year 6th of April through to the 5th of April, which for people unfamiliar with this is that the government, or rather the king, when income tax was first introduced, wanted to start it on the 1st of April, but that year, the 1st of April was Easter, and the king didn't want to start the tax year during a Christian festival. So they waited for the end of the Easter festival, which was the 6th of April. And there's if anybody's listening to this, and it is Valentine's night coming up tomorrow, and there's a lull in the conversation between you and the person you love, or you think you love, or you might want to love. There's a free line for you to keep the conversation flowing.
I think they'll be too busy showing off their Manscaped artwork.
That's true.
If there's still a lull in the conversation after you've showed off the landing strip, then fine. Carry on.
So under the PAYE system, whatever you earn from the 6th of April to the 5th of April is taxable. However, as we are aware, many footballers now have an element of their remuneration paid to an image right company. So if, for example, you are earning, the average player is earning perhaps £20 million over a career. A Premier League footballer, average wages in the Premier League these days, I reckon, are around about 60k a week. So it's £3 million a year. If you play for 6 years, you earn yourself around about 20 mil. What you can do is you can have the revenue will normally perhaps give you up to 20%. 20% max of that going into image rights. So what you could therefore do is that over the course of your career, you could transfer £4 million into your image rights company and not draw any of that money down during your playing career. And then it's sort of a bit like a mini pension. You've now got £4 million, which from the age of retirement, if you've not got any other employment either within the industry or outside of the football industry, you're now in a position to say, well, I can take X thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and it's quite a decent amount of money, and you will be taxed on it when you receive the money. So it's a way of delaying paying tax on your income, and of course, if you are a Premier League footballer, and let's say that you're on £60,000 a week, every additional pound that you earn, you're paying tax at 45%. You're paying national insurance, I think, at 1% as well. Whereas if you wait till after your career ends, then you can take advantage of your tax-free allowances and have perhaps a more of a staggered and end up paying a lower, what we refer to as a marginal rate of tax on each pound that you earn. So that's one way of doing it. I'm not a tax expert. I've not taught tax since about 2002, I think, from recollection. But it's one way of sort of having a bit of tax planning as far as your overall career earnings are concerned.
Do you know, Kieran, why the pension rules were changed so you can't get it at the age of 55? Was it to give players something, that they didn't spend all their money by the time they were 40, that they would definitely have something at the age of 55? Because you kind of feel they should be able to take their pension when they want, really, don't you, if they've paid in?
Yeah, I think it was part of a much broader review of pensions by Her Majesty's government. And it would have been the Labour government at the time when these rules were changed. I don't think that there was any sort of deep thinking with regards to we're worried about footballers wasting their pensions at the age of 35. And I'm pretty certain from the days when I used to teach tax, it used to be exactly the same for jockeys. Jockeys could retire at 35 as well. But that, I believe, has also been changed to 55. It was more to do with there were quite a few industries where early pensions and early retirements were effectively sanctioned in the legislation. And the aim at the time was the government wanted more money from the overall tax take, and therefore this was one way of doing it. And depending upon which newspaper you read, it was either trying to level the playing field between people in different industries, or it was a stealth tax.
Yeah, apologies to listeners for some sound effects you may have heard in the background there. That was my son, the comedian Ed Knight, otherwise known as Ed. Don't worry, Dad, I know you're doing a pod. I'll keep it quiet when I leave. Running down the stairs and slamming the door because, as always, he's left himself 45 seconds to get a train when the station's 55 seconds away. You may also hear, in a few minutes' time, my cousin's husband, Brian, known as Brexit Brian around these parts, is auditioning to be in the Magic Circle tomorrow night. So he's coming round in a few minutes to practice his act for Ali and I, and he's bringing the world's cutest puppy. So you'll hear that barking, and then you'll hear a really annoyed cat hissing, and then you'll hear a magician doing something with doves or whatever it is he's going to pull out of his top hat. I don't know. So just I thought I'd explain the sound effects. And Finley's very quiet, by the way, today. Are you definitely at home?
Yeah, I'm at home. Yeah, I'm in the office. The Baroness has got the fire on in the lounge, so he's
really.
Yeah.
Is it cold? There's supposed to be a beast from the east coming in, isn't there?
Yes.
I mean, that's weather, not one of your cricket team. Valentine's Day is almost here, and by the grace of Cupid, our friends at Manscaped are coming with the best tools to get your boys downstairs ready for the special occasion. Get lucky this Valentine's Day and join the 7 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped, the leaders in below-the-waist grooming, with our exclusive offer. Go to manscaped.com and use the code PRICEOFFOOTBALL for 20% off and free shipping. That's Price of Football, all in big letters for those big boys.
Well, Kevin, the Platinum package from Manscaped is the all-encompassing package that every guy needs in their life to make each and every day just a little bit more special. It includes the Lawnmower 4.0. Its advanced skin-safe technology reduces cuts and nicks on your delicate parts. And Manscaped they've even, Kevin, thrown in 2 free gifts: their Shed travel bag and anti-chafing boxer briefs to keep your boys stored comfortably.
You can get 20% off and free shipping with the code PRICEOFFOOTBALL. Don't forget, that's all in big letters for those big boys. Price of Football at manscaped.com. That's 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com, and use the code PRICEOFFOOTBALL. Join Cupid and shoot your arrow with Manscaped this Valentine's Day. Patrick Hoey has our next question, another interesting one. They all are. Patrick Hoey says, do clubs that have affiliate links with other clubs have to pay them an annual fee? For example, Rangers have a link with Linfield of Northern Ireland. We play the occasional friendly against them in pre-season or during the winter break, and we also send players on loan. Is it Rangers who will cover the whole cost of all these arrangements? Also, does a player have a choice in this matter when it comes to being loaned out?
With regards to sort of affiliate links, there's no formal cash arrangement between the two parties. I know Brighton, I think we got one with Hibernian,
yes,
for example. It's more of a case of what we refer to in the world of academia as a knowledge exchange. It's the opportunity to allow players and coaches and medical staff to see how somebody else is working, and you can. And we're not going down the pampas grass route here, but it's an opportunity to swap people in order to get a bit of experience and to get an understanding as to sort of a different psyche in respect of individual clubs. So with regards to Rangers and Linfield, I think that there clearly are there are links of a non-footballing nature between the two fan bases. So therefore they tend to quite like each other. And therefore, that if there is going to be a friendly, it's going to be packed out because Rangers have a big fan base in Linfield. And when Linfield are playing in Europe, for example, Rangers fans tend to be fully behind the team. So in terms of sending out players on loan, it's more of a sense of you try to sort of create a culture of familiarity. Would let Rangers cover the whole cost? No, not necessarily. Quite often the club which is putting the player out on loan will ask for a contribution towards wages. Could even charge a loan fee, depending upon the size of the club. If Chelsea are quite good at charging loan fees going into the millions for individual players. Does the player have a choice in the matter? Officially, the answer is no. Officially, the player can say, "No, I want to play my football in Glasgow. I want to fight for my place. I've got a young family here, and I'm not prepared to move to Linfield or wherever the destination will be." And the club will respond. But if in the eyes of the manager doesn't fancy the player, what can happen, and I do know one or two players for whom this happened, the club wanted them to go out on the loan. The player says, "Look, I'm really happy here. I've got a couple of small kids at school. Want to see them each day. My parents are around here as well. It's family as much as anything else." Then all of a sudden, you find yourself mysteriously having to train with the academy kids. So the awkward squad can come into it, but that's all unofficial. You'll never get confirmation from the club as to that being the reason. But if your cards are marked because you're deemed to be non-cooperative, then it's probably not good for career development. And if you take a look at the vast majority of loan deals in respect of clubs, they tend to be for younger players who just want to play football. They want to play first team football. So therefore there tends to be an element of enthusiasm. But having a good loan manager who can keep an eye on these young players is absolutely critical, because staying in a bedsit, staying in digs, not knowing the destination area particularly well, it can become a lonely place. And we are dealing with young men who are going through quite a lot. And I was reading today in the Times Mike Atherton writing very eloquently, as he always does, in respect of going away with England on tour. And I've been away on tour for a week with the Prowler and Size 5 and the Skunk and Biffa and so on, and that's fine. But I was, after about 4 or 5 days, I was thinking, I want to see I want to see my family, I want to see my kids, and I don't particularly want to see because remember this was in the pre-Manscaped days. I don't want to see that in the shower every day. It just felt a bit alien. And if you go out on tour for 3 or 4 months as a cricketer, sort of looking at sort of it from a mental health position, I was quite surprised at the extent of the impact it had on these individuals, because they're thousands of miles away from the people that they love. They're ultimately staying in a shared bedroom with somebody who they sort of know, but it can be really tough, and that's exactly the same in respect of players out on loans.
So if you see a rather bemused and shy-looking Hibs goalkeeper outside a hotel in Brighton tomorrow morning, be nice to him, because he might he'd have been bundled on the first plane from Edinburgh to Gatwick. We're recording this at, I was going to say tea time, Kieran, just to underline my working class roots. You probably say supper time, I don't know. But
I don't know. Supper's after tea.
You don't get a separate...
Supper's fourth meal of the day when you're feeling...
A fourth meal? My God, a fourth meal? Jesus. The fourth meal of the day is a bottle of wine, Kieran. Fourth meal of the day.
I think in your case it was 2 last night when you texted me after whilst you were watching Match of the Day and busily chortling to yourself.
I'm sorry, that's very unprofessional. You're quite right. Anyhow, it sounds like there's. I was just listening to reports of the game at Rangers v Partick this afternoon, which sounds like a proper cracker, a mass brawl following a Rangers goal, that the Rangers manager was so unhappy about his own team scoring that he made them let Partick Thistle score one into an empty net at the other end. So that all sounds the sort of feisty thing that makes you want to look up the highlights. Justin C has our next question. It's an unlikely one, Kieran, but again, it's an interesting one. And Justin says, well, it's unlikely for 2 reasons, as you'll find out. Justin says sometimes, or something I've wondered about for years, is just for example, if my team Sheffield Wednesday signed Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and added him to our squad, not as a player, but for marketing purposes. Now, this is quite unlikely, I think, Justin, because I believe, and in fact I know, that Dwayne Johnson is in fact a Macclesfield fan, it turns out, officially. But Justin's point is an interesting one. So we signed Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, we add him to Sheffield Wednesday's squad, we can then sell millions of SWFC football shirts with The Rock on the back. Is this allowed? Do you think it's possible to finance a football club by just selling lots of shirts in such a way? Odd question, I know, but we've had odder. But we talked last week about Tyson Fury being one of the options for Morecambe, and Morecambe fans have told us that he's said he's not interested publicly. But you can imagine Tyson Fury's got a huge global fan base. You can imagine that Morecambe would sell a lot of products with his face on, his name on.
Yeah, well, we've effectively seen that at Wrexham.
Yeah, of course.
If you look at the level of sales of Wrexham shirts, and Kim Kardashian was seen, and I don't do Instagram, but I have a wife that does. Kim Kardashian was seen recently wearing a Roma, I think it was 98-99 home shirt, and they just in the retro football shirts, they just sold out immediately. Wow. So having a named person endorse your products, and Wrexham have, there's no way that Wrexham would be sponsored by TikTok and Aviation Gin if it wasn't for McElhenney and Reynolds. Yeah. So you can get a benefit from this. I remember Usain Bolt signing for an Australian club in the A League, which is the Australian league, for people of you that are reading the Viz Profanosaurus whilst listening to this show, not what you're thinking about. And that had a positive impact. I'm pretty certain there was a singer, either from a boy band or something like that, who ended up on trial at a football club. We've had Romeo Beckham recently on trial for Brentford B. He's a model, and I believe he's a chef as well. Yeah. He's done things such as beans on toast, which apparently is these days counted as a celebrity meal.
Oh yeah, I believe he calls it toast under beans. Right. It's a new twist, I think.
And it can have a positive impact. Yeah, we've seen the impact on merchandise sales of celebrity players moving from one club to another, but having an affiliation with a celebrity in their own right, and there will be nothing wrong with Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, sitting down at the traditional start of season on the bench and giving him his own number. He could just not be a part of your 25-man squad. He could be deemed as a non-contract player or something like that.
Yeah, I would be interested in hearing from the authorities, for want of a better word, about this, because we've seen at Sellers Park this season a young lad who wasn't very well. He was given a squad number for one game, and got a huge amount of applause when it was read out. So it's something that has been done, but I'd be intrigued to see whether it is within the rules, because I think that's quite a clever little idea that Justin's had there. Possibly why he's not given us his full name, because he wants to keep it to himself. Our next question, Kieran, comes from Tommaso Grant. And again, it's another of those questions that you think, this is so simple, we should have thought of it before. But Tommaso Grant says, given that it's perfectly normal for players or even managers to move between clubs, and in the process effectively terminate their current employment contract. Why wouldn't something similar with backroom staff happen? For example, there are backroom staff working as scouts and coaches who are incredibly well regarded in the world of football. So why does the idea of a club paying a massive transfer fee for them not apply in the same way it applies to players? Surely a top-class coach with a history of developing brilliant players will be worth just as much in the long term as a decent first-team player, especially considering they're not limited by age, fitness. I suppose you could extend that to data analysts and all sorts, couldn't you?
Oh, absolutely. The reason why is that football players signed fixed length contracts, and therefore, if you want to, we know that Chelsea have signed Mudryk on a deal until June 2031. So if any other club wants to acquire his services, they've got to give Chelsea a compensation fee suitable to Chelsea to allow him to transfer the contract. In the case of a scout or a coach, the chances are they have a standard contract of employment, and therefore it could be that you have to give no more than 3 months or 6 months notice, or it could be a few more months. I know, for example, you mentioned data analysts. I think Liverpool's head data analyst, he's on some sort of gardening leave. So this is to prevent them from going to the clubs. So the person sits out. I know with Brighton and Dan Ashworth, for example, he wanted to go to Newcastle. Newcastle wanted him to go. Brighton said, well, if you give us enough money, we'll he's on a 12-month gardening. He's on a 12-month notice period. If you want us to walk away from that 12-month notice period, just pay us an appropriate amount of money. And that is the case. Then you will see appropriate fees. And Dan Ashworth was released from his clause. So it does happen in respect of coaches and so on, but the numbers tend to be small, because the perception in football is that it's the players and the first team coach who are the main drivers of success. Until that mentality changes, if you end up with a star data analyst that can spot the best players on the planet at the age of 12, then that person becomes of great value. And if you've got any sense, you tie them to a 5-year contract, and then you will be able to negotiate should they wish to move on, or should you be approached by another club.
Our penultimate question, Kieran, comes from Jan Menniken, who says, are the various club TV stations in the Premier League profitable, MUTV, for example, or are they typically a loss maker and more of a marketing exercise?
If we take a look at the accounts of MUTV, they are rather strange. MUTV normally makes probably £7 to £8 million a year in income, but it's making a loss of, figures I've got in front of me here, of 10 to 12 million, and then it sort of recharges some of its income. So it always effectively sort of breaks even. But I think on an operational basis that they struggle to really reach a tipping point where they are profitable. And as a consequence, clubs, in my view, are continuing to operate them because they are looking for that Pandora's box. They're looking for either at some point in the future, the Premier League says, we're going to allow you to broadcast 2 games a year from 2 of your home fixtures a year directly to your chosen TV company, in which case all of the numbers change very, very positively on behalf of the club. So certainly if we take a look at both Super League and Project Big Picture, the aim of both of those was to reduce competition in the Premier League by allowing the big clubs to sell their own rights. And all of a sudden, if you're running MUTV, you've already got so many thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of regular subscribers, and you can plug straight into those and start to make money out of them. But at present, in my view, that they're all tending to lose money, but they don't like to admit to it. So there's a bit of an unusual accounting taking place to make on the face of things that they're breaking even.
Although they do a good job making videos to introduce new players, don't they?
Yes.
Our last question, Kieran, comes from a chap called Matthew S. And I'm going to read it out, and I think I'm going to throw it open to our listeners to answer as much as anything you might have to say, Kieran. Because what Matthew S says is this: I'm thinking of starting a five-a-side pub league football team with a focus on mental health, a safe space for men and those who identify to play football and to speak about their mental health issues. I've seen clubs like this in bigger cities, but there isn't anything in my area. Trouble is, I have no idea where to start, and if I do start raising money to start a club, I don't want the tax man coming for me because I didn't know what I was doing. I think, Matthew, first of all, I'm going to recommend, if you can have, well, presumably Guy's got your email address, that if you could let me have it. Kieran, you would have noticed yesterday outside the pub, Paulson's Arms in the garden, a huge flag with a picture of Malcolm Allison on it, who is a huge Palace legend, despite the fact he relegated us twice in 2 seasons. But that was put up by a chap who started a few years ago a walking group for Palace fans with mental health issues who walked to an away game. It's becoming very popular, and other clubs have taken it up. And I know that the chap who started it would only be too happy to talk to Matthew about how he got things off the ground. And I'm sure that many of our listeners would probably be only too happy to help Matthew, especially if it turns out they're in his area as well. As we know, Kieran, as we've been talking about this for a different project, startup costs, even for a team at that level, can be quite substantial because you do have to abide by all the FA regulations, even down at that level. So there will be money involved, but I think there are people other than us that could help Matthew on a more practical level here with an answer to this question.
You're absolutely right. But I would say if it is five-a-side, Matthew, I don't think you'll have any trouble here.
Yeah,
certainly.
Yeah, of course.
You should. I would get in contact with your local leisure centre if you are going to try to raise money. The other thing that I would suggest doing is to open a separate bank account and to put through all of the income generated from this venture and all of the costs, and just keep some simple books. You don't have to get an accountant to do it. As long as you list everything out, and depending on how big it gets, then perhaps you might need some more assistance. But there's no need to worry really about the tax authorities, provided it doesn't explode in terms of success, and then the HMRC are more likely to take an issue. If it's a normal five-a-side team, even a Sunday morning 11-a-side team, HMRC aren't interested because what you tend to be doing, you're collecting match fees, you're paying the referee, you're paying for the pitch hire. You might have training once or twice a week. Yes, you've got to go and pay for the kit, and the numbers involved in terms of the revenue aren't interested in your income; they're interested in your profits. And Sunday league teams simply just don't make money, so revenue aren't interested. You will be significantly below the VAT threshold, in my view, because that's tens and tens of thousands. So I think you can be relatively relaxed, but just for your own peace of mind, as much as anything else, just keep the five-a-side football team separate from the rest of your of your personal financial affairs.
Yeah, and if any of our listeners do have their own experience of doing something like this, then please do either tweet us or get in touch with producer Guy, so he might be able to pass contact details on. Also, what I would suggest, Matthew, as well, because it sounds like you refer to bigger cities, so it sounds like you're in a smaller town or maybe a rural area. So it might be worth approaching your local football club if they're in League One or League Two or National League or lower, just to see if they're interested in helping you start something like this, just maybe through their website. So I think you will find that people are very keen to get involved and help, Matthew. So even if you start by putting a notice up in a pub toilet, basically, and just saying we're going to be watching a game next Sunday here live, if you want to come along and have a chat, just get people chatting. And then and then those people will probably have some skills and talents or organisational ability that you can tap into anyway. So if we can help in any way, we will, Matthew, and we wish you the best of luck with that endeavour. In the meantime, if anybody listening would like to make a small monthly contribution to the pod, I believe I said contribution there, Kieran, I meant contribution. Feel free to put that in the Viz Profanosaurus. Which people were in awe of you yesterday in Paulson's Arms when you told them that you had 49. Is it 49 entries?
43.
43 entries, yes. Of course.
And I accidentally brought along the latest copy just to prove that my name's in the esteemed publication.
We saw that, Kieran, and I didn't tell you yesterday, Kieran. It did cause me some slight embarrassment, I have to say, because you walked in and I went, there you go. He's got his private eye with him. He's always researching. And it turned out it wasn't private eye, it was Viz. Rolled up. But yes, if you'd like to make join those people who have made a small monthly contribution to the COD, then you can go to patreon.com/priceoffootball. And if you have a question you'd like answered on the show, or you'd like to get in touch with us about Matthew S. and his new football team, then please do that via questions@priceoffootball.com. And in the meantime, I shall hand you over to Mr. Kieran Maguire for his customary farewell.
Well, thank you to everybody who's contributing via Patreon. We really do appreciate your support for the show. It is very kind. There are other ways of showing a bit of positive karma towards the show, and that's to give us a review. If you go onto your app and you give us a review, we're told by Producer Guy it doesn't actually matter what your narrative is. You can use prose or poetry, whatever you want. You could even say you would rather have the show presented by Edward Scissorhands and Robert Sanchez, and it wouldn't make a blind bit of difference to me in the way I feel at present.
There's an away point, Kieran. So at every point away in the Premier League is hard fought.
Yes.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The price of football. The price of football.